This call is now being recorded.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Darshawn McAway. You're tuned in to Wild Podcast. By all means, go to wildpodcast.me. That's WOWPODCAST.me. Now, today we have a special guest. We have Rachael Tamayo. She's here to talk to us about her book, Carnal Knowledge. Rachel, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So let me start this way. I like to bring people onto the podcast to ask them, what was that wow moment that made you decide to be a writer?
I've been writing since I can remember, to tell you the truth. When I was in elementary school, I would write little silly plays with my friends and put them on in front of my class and write little stories, and I just wrote all kinds of stories when I was a little kid. And my parents encouraged me, with the whole thing. And as a teenager, I grew into it as a teenager, and they brought me, I was still my age and everything, word processors and all that stuff, and to type and typewriters and everything. And I would type out full books. I still got a couple of them in my closet, as a teenager. And I had every intention of being published, but there was really no internet back then, and you have no access to the information that you have now as far as how to become a better writer and how to improve what you're doing, what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, and all those other things that every new writer needs to know. So I stopped writing for some years, and a lot of years, so many years that my husband didn't even know that I wrote when I started again. And I was probably in my mid-30s when I decided to start writing again. I was dispatching for the police department. I'd just been put on night shift, and I figured, well, I have all this spare time, and I've got all these stories in my head, so I decided just to start putting them down, and I started taking it seriously. I met another writer that helped me improve, and I just haven't stopped since.
Gotcha. So let's talk about your latest book, Carnal Knowledge. What is this book about?
This book is the second book in the Seven Deadly Sins series, with each book being about one of the seven deadly sins, but they're standalone. You can read one. You can start anywhere. You won't miss anything. This book is about a character named Rin. She wakes up in a pool of blood and doesn't know what happened, and it's a dark thriller about, she discovers that she is next on the list for a serial killer that nobody even knew existed, because the local police department kept a lid on it. They didn't like the media. They didn't want any attention, so they just kept it quiet. And her ex-husband, who is a former police officer, informs her of what is actually happening, and she discovers the truth, that there's a serial killer that he spends some weeks playing with his victims before he actually kills them. So she ends up with this knowledge, knowing that she is next, not knowing what she can possibly do about it. That he's killed 7 other women that nobody knew about. That's what the book is about.
Ooh, sounds like a thriller for sure. Definitely a page turner. So you mentioned that you were a 911 dispatcher. Did that influence your writing?
I think it did over time. When I first started writing, even as a teenager, and I think not most, but quite a few writers start out writing romance, because writing romance is frankly easy. It's very formulated, and you kind of just, as long as you're plugging things in where they go, it's easy to write a romance. But I never really wanted to be a romance writer. It's just where I started. I wanted to be a thriller author. I've always wanted to be a thriller author. I like reading thrillers. I always have. Historical and domestic and just all kinds of thrillers. But I wasn't sure I was good enough, frankly. And so I kind of wrote, I want to say 4 books before I started kind of making my way into thrillers. And now here I am. And I'm exclusively writing thrillers, and I'm not really writing romance anymore.
So did the romance just basically turn you off and you just wanted to get into psychological thrillers?
Yeah, I think as far as the 911 dispatching, I did it for 12 years, and I think seeing that side of humanity and learning what I learned about human behavior and how people react in situations, and the mental health aspect. I know quite a bit about the police side of the psychology, and as far as 911, having to talk to people that had mental health problems on the phone all the time. You know, and it gives me a unique insight, I think, that most people don't have, because I can see both sides of it. I see the victim, I see the non-victim. I've seen it all, basically, in the 12 years I did it. I saw quite a bit. And I think that darkness, just living in it for so many years, it did influence me, and it did pull me into that psychological that I probably wouldn't have gone into before.
Right. So tell me, let's talk about that a little bit as far as the mental health aspect. When you were doing the 911 dispatchers, like what was your mental health like during that time? Like how were you processing, I guess, before you had to go home?
Well, I was fine for quite some time. I mean, it takes us, they say that less than 2% of the population has the ability to do police dispatch. And I wasn't in a, huge city like Houston or anything. I wasn't in just a regular small suburban city. But it was busy enough. And bad things happen in the suburbs just like they do in the city. And over time, and especially after I had kids and seeing, how, different things that happened to children affected me more than it had before. But I was a dispatcher during the Santa Fe school shooting, which happened right here, 30 minutes from where I am. And my police department, I was working that day, and my SWAT team was there, and I dispatched the SWAT team to that shooting, and that affected me. Even though I knew I was having some trouble at the time, dealing with some of the emotional aspects of it, because I've been doing it for a long time. And because most dispatchers don't do it for more than like 5 years. That's the typical turnover. After that day, I didn't take any 911 calls, but knowing what my officers were in and what they had seen, because they had come back and told us, I cried all the way home that day. Mm-hmm. And that year was the year my son started kindergarten, and I was terrified to send him to school. So I realized then that it was affecting me more than it should, and maybe it was going to get to the point where I wasn't going to be able to be mentally there for my kids, and because my kids are small, I needed to pull myself out of it before I started getting something like PTSD from it. So I pulled myself out of it, and I don't do it anymore.
Gotcha. So now that you're out of it, what are your plans for the Deadly Sin series?
I've written the third book. It's called Mine. The publisher has it. It's about greed. That one will be next. It'll come out sometime next year. I've not quite started the fourth one yet. I've been in the middle of the book release, and then I'm going to be editing this other one soon. But honestly, I jumped into this idea with both feet, and I'm the kind of writer that I've never really have any idea where I'm going with anything.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I will start an idea, and it will end up in a completely different place than where I intended it to. It's just, I can't plan it out. It just comes out of me. So,
Right. So how can people reach out to you and also purchase your book, Carnal Knowledge?
Carnal Knowledge will be available tomorrow worldwide, anywhere books are sold. I know it's on Amazon right now on pre-order, Barnes & Noble, just basically anywhere you can get it. My website is www.rachaeltamayowrites.com. You can contact me there or my publicist. You can email me, and I'll even, if you really want a signed copy, send me a message, and I'll see that I can get that to you.
Well, you're listening to Wild Podcast. I'm your host, Darshawn McAway. We're speaking to author Rachael Tamayo. Her book comes out July 11th of 2020. It's called Carnal Knowledge. Rachael, thank you so much for coming by the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.